Hello everyone and welcome to another video of Chess Down Under. Today we will be unpacking a really fascinating game played by Magnus Carlsen all the way back in 2003. He was only 12 years old at this stage. He didn't have his Grandmaster title yet, but he was already completely dismantling really strong players. In this game that we'll be unpacking, he plays the white pieces against a Sicilian dragon, one of the most popular openings when it comes to club level chess and online chess as well. Okay, let's dive into the game and see how Magnus negotiates the white side of the Sicilian dragon. So Magnus is playing with the white pieces and he starts with e4. We see c5, the Sicilian defense, knight f3, d6, d4, black takes on d4, so we see an open Sicilian with the exchange of pawns here. Knight f6, attacking white's pawn on e4. Knight c3, defending the pawn. And g6, so this pawn move here is the start of the dragon variation, one of the coolest names of all chess openings. So black is looking to fianchetto his bishop, which could prove to be extremely strong on this long diagonal, especially if white castles queenside. So we have g6 and the dragon variation from black here. Bishop to e3, developing. Magnus is prioritizing the development of his queenside pieces as he's looking to quickly pave the way for his king to castle queenside. Bishop to g7, f3. The purpose of this move is if white were to first play queen to d2, he could get annoyed by knight to g4, which would hit the bishop. So in this line, it's a very theoretical position. We play f3, so now we can play queen to d2 without getting bothered by knight to g4. Black castles, queen to d2, preparing a queenside castle. Knight c6, queenside castles, and black here takes on d4. In this position though, black really has two different types of approaches of how he handles this position. He can try to first exchange these knights as what we saw in the game, or he can play for an early d5 break. In this game, black took the knight on d4 and we recapture with the bishop, looking potentially to exchange it off for black's important bishop on g7. And in any of these types of structures where black has fianchettoed his bishop like this, if you can exchange that piece, it turns out to be very beneficial for you because that piece here is playing a very important defensive role guarding the black king, especially as the pawns are on light squares, which means that the pieces need to cover the dark squares. So if we can exchange these pieces off, white would be very happy. We see bishop to e6 and g4. So white has a very clear attacking plan in this game, and as does black. We have the kings castled on opposite sides. We have white on the queen side and black on the king side. When we have these types of positions, one of the most common strategies is to simply launch your pawns up towards the enemy king to try to break apart the shelter that they have in front of their king. Once you launch your pawns up, you're essentially looking to open up lines so that your heavy pieces and your minor pieces can start becoming effective and join the attack. So the purpose of these pawn storms is really to open up lines. Black comes out to a5 with his queen, and Magnus slides across with his king to b1. Now in this position here, this is a particular pattern that you need to be aware of. It happens in many different Sicilian lines, but especially in the dragon, you will see this a lot. Whenever the queen comes out to a5, and you see the two queens here staring each other off with an X-ray, so we can imagine that if that knight was not there, the two queens would be tradable. In this particular pattern, you need to be very aware of the possibility that the knight can jump in to d5 opening up a attack against the black queen. And if black were to take white's queen, white would not recapture immediately, but his knight on d5 would first take on e7 with check. It is a very common pattern and it catches out a lot of club players. So let's just now play a random move for black just to show what that pattern looks like. Let's say if black, for example, played something like h6, a nothing move, white can jump in with his knight to d5, and if black were to simply take the queen, we jump in first with the check, and then once the black king moves, we pick up the queen, and we have won a free pawn. So it is a very common pattern to be aware of when the two queens are staring at each other like that. That is why in this position, black played rook from f to c8, and this actually guards against that threat. So you might scratch your head and think, hey, how comes this rook move guards against that threat? If white were to try that now, let's say, for example, knight d5 immediately, black were to exchange, and again, instead of retaking the queen immediately, if white were to try that same move, knight takes e7, he thinks, hey, hang on, this must be fantastic because I'm hitting the king, I'm hitting the rook as well. But the point is, the black king simply shuffles across to f8. He is now attacking the knight, but white needs to spend the tempo recapturing the queen. You can't simply take the rook now because you would get checkmated on the back rank. So white would have to spend a tempo to retake the queen, and then black just scoops up that knight. So actually, you'd be losing a piece for a pawn here. So that would be a really horrible continuation for white. That is why rook to f8 is actually a fairly intelligent and sneaky way of guarding against that knight d5 threat. Okay, of course, Magnus does not play knight to d5. He knows what he's doing, and he plays a3. We see rook to b8. Black is looking to launch his queenside pawns himself at the white king. And knight to e2. Magnus is offering a trade of queens to black. Little does black know that Magnus ends up to become arguably the greatest endgame player of all time. Does he take up Magnus on this offer? Of course, at this stage, when Magnus was 12 years old, he would have no idea how strong Magnus would become at endgames. So, do we see an exchange of queens here? No, we don't. Black looks to keep queens on the board, putting pressure on c2 as well, tying down the white pieces for the time being to protect that point. Magnus pushes forward with g5, attacking the knight on f6, and once the knight moves, we have an exchange of dark squared bishops. Black retakes with his knight, and as we mentioned earlier, white has made a significant accomplishment now by exchanging those dark squared bishops. The black dark squared bishop was extremely powerful, eyeing b2 right in front of the white king. It was on the long diagonal and had extreme activity, so exchanging it off and leaving black with these dark square holes around his king is a step in the right direction for white. Magnus centralizes his knight to d4 and attacks the bishop on a6. b5 from black, so he is not worried about the exchange of bishop for knight. He is looking to generate his play and his threats against the white king as quickly as possible, and that is a typical, I guess, style that we see when kings are on the opposite side of the board. The speed of your attack becomes one of the most important parts of the position. And now in this position here, I think that this is a great position for club players to really test their understanding and their feel for these types of positions. I know that a lot of club players here would be tempted by moves like h4 or f4, looking to get their attack going. Don't worry about what's happening on the queen side. My attack is against the black king on the king side. Surely I need to just launch, harry up the board and open up some lines. But actually, the correct move here, and what Magnus played as well, is actually queen to b4. The reason for that is because black was really just one move away from starting to open up some lines against the white king. And we can see that the black heavy pieces are actually very well placed against the white king. And opening up lines against the black king in that situation, in this particular position, you can see it's quite slow, right? It takes some time. We might even need to sacrifice an exchange to open up some lines or get some other pieces involved in the attack. So we can see that white's attack actually takes some time to build up. It's very powerful, it's got a lot of potency, but it just needs to wind up a bit. So black's attack is faster in this situation. So the very calm queen to b4 here was the correct approach and what Magnus played. He's not afraid of trading queens because he feels that he would have good prospects in the endgame. Once again, black declines the exchange of queens. Magnus exchanges his knight for the bishop and black retakes. And now we have an interesting situation where white has got a bishop, the light squared bishop, and black has got a knight. Let's see how the two players set up the board and configure their pieces so that the position favors their type of minor piece. We see h4 from Magnus as the g5 pawn was under attack. So h4 not only protects g5, but we also look to potentially push forward and start opening up some lines against the black king. Queen to b6. So white needs to be very careful here that the queen doesn't come in this way with assistance of the rook from c8. We see h5 now, so Magnus is not too worried about those types of infiltrations. He's looking to open up lines. And this is a really fascinating move as well, because not only is he looking to open up lines by pushing that pawn forward, the fact that this pawn pushed forward, it means that g5 is now up for taking for black. Black now finally decides to infiltrate with his queen. He jumps in to f2, and the queen here is incredibly active. Look at this. We are threatening an absolutely devastating check here on c2, which would completely end the game if that were to be allowed to happen. We are also threatening the pawn here on f3, and g5 is hanging as well. There are literally 3 pawns under attack here, all hanging, and there is only one move here. Out of everything that you could possibly do, there is just one move for white that keeps the game in balance. It's not the most obvious move to find, but Magnus, at 12 years old, plays the very clinical bishop to d3, holding the game in balance. And I won't reveal all of the points to this move because it might spoil what's going to come later in the game. It is a really awesome and deep move. Let's see how the game plays out. Black takes on g5. White manages to open up the h-file, so now the rook is very active. Gee, if there were only a way to magically allow that queen to somehow teleport along here, that would be absolutely devastating. So what does Magnus play here? He plays the incredible pawn to e5. Have a look at this. A second sacrifice of a pawn. Magnus is already down 1 pawn, and now he has 2 pawns hanging. So sacrificing more material here, but his idea, and this is a really important idea that you need to be aware of if you're playing the white side of the dragon. A lot of the time, the way that the white attack can really start getting potent is when that queen can swing across and get into the action. At the moment, the queen is guarding that square, so if white immediately were to move across, we'd see an exchange of queens. But this pawn sacrifice here, e4 to e5, has opened up the 4th rank and provides many different avenues for the white queen to enter the game. She could look to come in here, potentially f4. So this one move, it sacrifices a pawn, but it makes your strongest piece in your army a lot more effective. So I know that a lot of club players will really struggle giving away material for positional gains where there isn't anything really obvious to be gained immediately. But in this situation, you need to ask yourself the question, well, what is the most valuable piece in the white army? It is the queen. She's the most valuable and strongest piece in the army, but her movement is kind of restricted and hampered at the moment. By simply sacrificing one measly pawn, we suddenly make the strongest piece in our army incredibly powerful again. So e5, double exclamation mark. Black takes the loose pawn on f3, and he's also now threatening the pawn on e5 as well. And now have a look at this Magnus exchanges. And after a recapture, I know that a lot of club players here would be tempted by simply scooping up that pawn. It's unprotected and the white queen can take it. But Magnus is way too classy for that. Have a look at this move. The absolutely clinical queen to f4. Have a look at that. Not only are we pinning the knight against the queen, somewhat immobilizing black's attacking pieces, we have now given ourselves 2 entry points into those really juicy dark squares around the black king. And if the white queen manages to infiltrate there, it's lights out for black. So absolutely incredibly clinical move here from Magnus. Doesn't care about scooping up the pawn and restoring material balance. No, he's looking to activate his queen and start harassing that black king. We see black pushing forward with b4, looking to advance his attack and to start opening up lines against the white king. And again, Magnus, queen to h6. He's not worried about that pawn capturing on a3 because he'd just deliver checkmate in 1. What good is a pawn if your king is getting checkmated? So Magnus completely ignoring the black side's threats and jumping into h6 with his queen with some devastating threats. Black must guard the square on h8 to prevent checkmate, so he moves his queen to e4 where it is nicely centralized. A great looking piece here. Look at this. It defends the back rank there, so no more checkmate for white. But also have a look at this. If black were to manage to open up that line, black would be threatening his own checkmate. So a really double-edged looking position here. How does Magnus handle this? And now bishop takes g6. Have a look at this. So much happening on the board at this stage. That bishop move, taking on g6, has unveiled a very important strike against the black queen with the rook on d1. But not only that, have a look at this. White is now threatening a simple 2-move checkmate sequence. So what can black do? If black were to simply take that bishop, well, you can't do that because you've just lost your queen. So instead, black drops his queen back to g7 to try to parry all of those threats. But have a look at this. This is absolutely incredible. Magnus plays bishop to h7 check, and this forces the black king into the corner of the board. If black tried to run to f8, well, actually we'd just pick up d6 here with our queen, check, and we'd force the black king out into the open. And once the king is on an open file like that, it would be a trivial checkmate. So the black king is forced into h8. And now take a look at this. The very calm queen takes d6. We have now opened up a absolutely devastating discovered check against the black king. And not only that, from this square here, the white queen is actually playing an important defensive duty. Because have a look at this. Black takes the pawn on a3, looking to open up lines and start creating some threats against the white king. And now that white queen, beautifully placed on d6, just simply slots back to a3, scooping up the pawn, threatening to come up here, threatening to take the loose knight here, threatening all kinds of discovered checks. This is unbelievable. Can black do anything here? He tries this incredibly interesting looking move, rook to c3, taking advantage of the pin here. The white queen can't just simply take the rook because it's actually guarded and we wouldn't be able to retake because the pawn is pinned. So this is an incredible looking shot. What can Magnus do? He plays the clinical bishop to g6, discovered check. Have a look at this unbelievable sequence. The king is forced to g8 and now he takes on f7. Unreal. Black retakes and the queen slots in this way as well. Now have a look at this. We have forked the king and the rook, but Magnus is not simply looking to scoop up material here. He comes into d6 with his rook. The king is forced to break its connection with the queen, and once the queen is gobbled up and lost, it's game over. And in this position, black resigned the game. What an absolutely incredible game that was played here by Magnus. 12 years old, back in 2003. He wasn't even a grandmaster at this stage, but we got to see a glimpse into the star that was, about to start dominating the next decade or multiple decades in world chess. So a real fascinating game here, and I'm sure the opponent got up off the board and scratched his head and thought to himself, wow, this kid might be something special. So I hope that everyone enjoyed the game today. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please do like and subscribe as it really helps the channel. Thank you.